Hi everybody, my name is Sylvette Ramos Diaz, and I would like to share with you, excuse me, some of the important things that I found while reading chapters 1, 2, and 3 of our last assignment for our speech communication course. So every chapter in this assignment, I found that it had some important message to teach about communication and what it is and how to actually communicate. In chapter 1, I learned that effective communication skills are very important in today's society. For example, going to a job interview is very stressful, and knowing what to say, how to say it, and feeling confident is very important. It's something that employers look for constantly. So, what is communication? Well, communication occurs not only when you're speaking to someone face to face, but also when you're texting, emailing, or when you're talking on social networks and other forms of communication. The proper use of communication skills is very important when especially when you're trying to get a message across. So, as the speaker, it is your job to keep the audience focused on what it is that you're saying. And you can do this by first effectively explaining yourself and expressing your thoughts in a way that your audience will find relatable. Also, it is the audience's job to be willing to understand what it is that the speaker is saying and what their perspective is on a certain topic. And when the audience is willing to do that, and the speaker is also willing to hear what their audience has to say, there's a lot of effective communication going on. And you always want that when you're trying to get a message across, whenever you're giving a speech, or whenever you're just talking to another person who's right in front of you. One very important point that was made in chapters 2 and 3 is that our brains can only focus on a few little things at a time. So, for example, if someone is giving a speech and they're trying to persuade their audience into believing something, well, it is the speaker's job to keep the audience attentive and also somehow get them to engage, and that can be done by telling the audience to ask questions afterwards or give their opinions on the topic, and so on and so forth. Also, there's a lot of other things that our brain could choose to focus on. So the more interesting, the more confident that the speaker feels, the easier it is for the audience to engage in the conversation rather than paying attention to everything else that's going on around them. Another important point that I feel like I've heard several times, but it's always good to mention, is do not plagiarize. We all know that plagiarism is taking someone else's work and calling it our own without giving credit where it's due. When a speaker or when someone is trying to communicate something and you don't plagiarize, it shows that you are capable of doing your research and getting information in order to support your argument, but you're also responsible enough to give credit where it's due. And that really adds to your speaker credibility, especially when you are writing a research paper. When you don't plagiarize, that's wonderful because it shows you can actually do research, you can support your argument, and you're responsible enough to give credit where it's due. And you always want to have high speaker credibility. And last but not least, it talked pretty much everywhere in the readings about social networking and how it's affecting the way people communicate nowadays. So we have Facebook and Twitter and Tumblr and things like that, and they all help people connect with others, whether they are near or far. So physical barriers are overcome with social networking and the internet and things like that. However, there's certain things that are still negative about social networking. For example, when you are on Facebook, you have to access that through the internet, meaning you have to use electronics in order to have access to Facebook. This means you're interacting more with electronics than with people. For example, I have a little brother, he's 13 years old, he has an iPhone, and he spends a lot of his time just texting or on Facebook or just staring at his phone. Every time I try to have a conversation with him, it's like I have to take his phone, put it down, and ask him to pay attention to me, because there's just that the electronics and the social networking that is going on in the palm of his hands, it takes away from our conversation when I'm trying to have a face-to-face conversation with him. So social networking, I feel like it makes conversation less personal, obviously because you're not actually standing in front of someone and talking, but also because it takes away from what you would normally do or say when you're actually in front of someone trying to get your message across. Now, in all of these chapters in our readings, they talk about different ways to communicate and how it's affecting the way people live their lives and how society is changing because of social networks and different ways that are being created in order to communicate easier. And they're all really interesting, but there are some that are more towards the negative side, and I feel that if we let social networks and technology control us when we're trying to communicate, eventually we're going to get to the point where we can't control how much technology controls us. So if you guys have any questions about my little spiel, you can just reply to my video and ask your questions, and thank you.